Have you been surprised by how quickly fraudsters moved in on this money? But now investigators say hundreds of billions have been lost to fraud.
The buyer got $7 million from the federal government, allegedly claiming he had 400 employees. According to prosecutors, he had none.
The federal government approved a historic $5 trillion in pandemic assistance for struggling Americans, small businesses, and healthcare providers.
Federal agents arrived at the couple's door. They allegedly tried to stash this bag of $450,000 in their backyard. Once convicted, they fled, abandoning their teenage children. Arrested finally in Montenegro.
In the archives of financial history, there exists a dark and captivating chapter that has captivated the world's attention like no other. It is the story of the world's biggest financial fraud, a colossal deception that shook the very foundations of trust in the financial world. This audacious and intricate tale of deceit, cunning, and betrayal transcends the boundaries of national borders, demonstrating that no institution or individual is immune to the allure of unimaginable wealth or the temptation to bend the rules.
The man is accused of lying about his business, saying it had hundreds of employees with an average monthly payroll of nearly $3 million, but federal investigators say none of that was true.
The scheme helped him land millions from the PPP program, and Calvin's in the newsroom with the details.
Well, we've heard this.
But with estimates of hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars stolen, the task is enormous. And we're talking fraud in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. Can you handle those many cases?
Now to growing concerns about the deadly coronavirus officially hitting the U.S. Here's what we know. A Washington state resident fell ill after returning from Wuhan, China, where the outbreak began. Officials now say more than 400 people have been sickened and 9 people have died. The World Health Organization is holding an emergency meeting right now.
The COVID-19 pandemic, a seismic event that shook the world in 2019 and continued to repeat several times as an echo into the early 2020s, will undoubtedly etch itself deeply into the pages of history books for generations to come. This unprecedented global crisis not only brought nations to their knees, but also unveiled the resilience, adaptability, and vulnerability of societies and individuals in the face of an invisible adversary. The story of COVID-19 transcends borders, transcends time, and transcends the expectations of what the world thought it knew about public health, science, governance, and human behavior. In every sense, it is a watershed moment, leaving an indelible mark in history books and reshaping the way we understand, prepare for, and respond to global health crisis. It would seem all hope was lost.
The pandemic shifted lives for billions around the globe. Here in the U.S., business owners were forced to find ways to adapt. Those who were unable to closed their doors.
Businesses were declaring bankruptcy, going under, and struggling to make payroll demands. What was going to happen next? For these businesses and their respective owners, this was their means of making a living. And not only did the pandemic affect only them, but their employees, their families, their children. Put yourself in this position and tell me, what would you do? With death staring these owners right in the face, it would seem there was a sliver of hope. Therefore, a savior was born, the PPP loan.
Federal government approved a historic $5 trillion in pandemic assistance for struggling Americans, small businesses, and healthcare providers.
President Trump has signed legislation that extends the deadline for businesses to apply for a loan under the Federal Paycheck Protection Program, known as PPP. Congress passed the bill Wednesday, sending it to the president's desk. PPP was established in March as part of the coronavirus relief bill. Since then, more than 4.8 million small businesses applied for $520 billion in potentially forgivable loans.
The Paycheck Protection Program is a $953 billion business loan program established by the United States federal government during the Trump administration in 2020 through the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, CARES Act, to help certain businesses, self-employed workers, sole proprietors, certain nonprofit organizations, and tribal businesses continue paying their workers. The Paycheck Protection Protection Program allows entities to apply for low-interest private loans to pay for payroll and certain other costs. A PPP loan amount is approximately equal to 2.5 times the applicant's average monthly payroll cost. Sometimes an applicant may receive a second draw, typically equal to the first. The loan would cover payroll costs, rent, interest, and utilities. The loan may be partially or fully forgiven if the business keeps its employee counts and employee wages stable. The U.S. Small Business Administration implemented the program. The deadline to apply for a PPP loan was March 31st, 2021. In order to be eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program, an applicant must be a small business, sole proprietor, independent contractor, self-employed person, nonprofit organization, veterans organization, or a tribal business. So the government is pretty much giving away free money. You can almost imagine the greed that has started to consume the hearts of people. A way of getting an enormous paycheck by effectively doing nothing but answering a few questions. This is too good to be true. It's almost as if the government was inviting scammers and fraudsters. And guess what? That's exactly what happened. A total of approximately $80 billion was lost due to fraud. This money was meant to help those who really needed it, those who had to make payroll demands and keep their businesses from going bankrupt. However, these individuals saw the PPP loan as an opportunity to get rich quick. So let's meet these people who scammed the system into generating millions of dollars in their bank accounts within a matter of minutes. Haywood Talco, who oversees strategic business activities concerning all customer operations, sales, marketing, communications, consulting, corporate development, and ecosystem activities, described how most fraud took place. The basic scheme was really simple. People went on state websites and took the names of existing businesses or registered new, fake ones. There's absolutely no security on there. There's no validation of any information. And voila, you have company ABC with 40 employees and a payroll of $10 million. David Hines, 29, admitted to a fraud scheme that netted him $3.9 million. Hines, who said in court papers that he struggled with addiction, bought a $318,000 Lamborghini Huracan. He also spent thousands on luxury hotels, jewelry, clothing, and dating sites. His car was seized by authorities and almost all the money was recovered. Juan Gonzalez, who was the U.S. attorney in the South District of Florida at the time, had the pleasure of handling these extreme fraud cases. A man and a woman admitted to a complex scheme in which, among other things, they claimed they were operating farms with many employees out of a small single-family home in the middle of the city. Gonzalez mentions, once you looked at the paperwork and once you saw what it was, all it took was a drive to the farm to see there was no farm. In another Florida case, prosecutors had charged a man who they say used proceeds from a $7.2 million emergency loan to buy a 12,579 square foot mansion, a Lincoln Navigator car, a Maserati, and a Mercedes-Benz. A California couple was convicted in June of stealing $18 million. They purchased houses, diamonds, gold coins, luxury watches, expensive furniture, and other valuables, according to prosecutors. And if it couldn't get any worse, as they were being sentenced, they cut off their ankle bracelets and fled, leaving their children behind, according to the FBI. They were soon captured in Montenegro, where they attempted to hide from authorities. As a result to their capture, the man was sentenced to 17 years in prison, and his wife got 6 years. Ilyas Eldaba, who appears to have no criminal record, was charged with trying to steal $17 million from the PPP. According to his LinkedIn page, he earned a degree in computer engineering from California State University, Sacramento, and has worked in various technology jobs. Among the property prosecutors seized was a Tesla Model 3. Now, there was one individual who was extremely bold in their tactics in obtaining millions of dollars. This person did it in a more fashionable and public way, dubbing her as one of the most popular fraudsters of the PPP loan. Allow me to introduce you to Danielle Miller. The charging documents in her case say she stole identifying information from a Massachusetts state website and used the information to apply for COVID relief loans. In 40 minutes, she had $100,000 in taxpayer money. She soon booked a private jet from Florida to California, where she spent $5,500 at a luxury hotel in West Hollywood. On her Instagram account, which has 34,000 followers, Miller posted photos from 2 posh hotel stays paid for with fraud money. Miller's criminal record includes arrest in 5 different states, many of which were related to larceny and identity-related fraud. She also participated in a recent profile in a New York magazine that portrayed her as a child of wealthy Manhattan parents, whose life was derailed by the circulation of a sexually explicit video when she was in the 8th grade. Honestly, I more so consider myself a con artist than anything, the magazine quoted her as saying. You know how they have that saying that you can sell ice to an Eskimo? If there's something that I want, I'm getting it. Man, what's funny was just how braggadocious she was. As a fraudster, you would think that she would, be silent and fall under the radar. Not for Danielle. It's almost as if she wanted to get caught. She wanted the public to see just how rich she truly was. She got exactly what she wanted, but with a cost. And we are not talking money. Across the country, only 178 people have been convicted so far in PPP fraud cases, according to the Justice Department. So it begs a question: how were these fraudsters able to get a hold of such large lump sums of cash so easily? Who is really at fault? So who is to blame? Is it the government? Is it the fraudsters themselves? Or could it be the financial technology companies who process these applications? For these fraudsters to gain access to this free money being handed out, they had to do it through a financial technology company. Companies like Cabbage, Womply, and Blue Acorn were tasked with getting the money to those who were in dire need of it. During an 18-month-long investigation, the House Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Crisis reviewed about 83,000 pages of internal emails, messages, and other documents from more than a dozen fintechs and interviewed former employees, executives, and lending partners. Their findings will shock you. Many fintechs failed to stop obvious and preventable fraud because they had little to no fraud prevention efforts in place. Fintechs profited off processing fees for each approved loan, meaning they had little incentive to find fraud that would cut into their revenues. Banks and lending partners collaborating with fintechs admitted doing little to check for fraud in fintech approved loan applications. These findings push the narratives that not just the fraudsters are at fault, but rather these fintech companies saw an opportunity to increase their profit margins. In the spring of 2020, a fintech called Cabbage furloughed half of its workers who were dedicated to assessing risk and reviewing accounts. Yet Cabbage funded billions of dollars in PPP loans by relying on temporary contractors, the report says. The fintech Womply had fraud prevention systems described in the report as put together with duct tape and gum. Meanwhile, Womply's CEO had been convicted of insider trading, yet was leading the company's fraud prevention efforts. The fintech Blue Acorn spent just a few $1 million on fraud prevention, even as it raked in more than $1 billion in PPP processing fees. Blue Acorn employees claim they received no training on the loan underwriting process or how to spot fake driver's license and tax documents, according to the report. Blue Acorn's loan reviewers were told the faster the better by managers who recommended spending no more than 30 seconds on each application. Internal documents encourage Blue Acorn workers to only flag applications with extreme obvious fraud, because the Small Business Administration, or SBA, would handle any fraud we didn't stop. The faster the better, huh? It would seem they are out for the people's best interests. I mean, they do need the money fast for payroll needs. But is there something deeper going on here? Is there someone holding the strings, someone with a lot of power who saw COVID-19 as a time to get rich? I don't know, but I know all of this could have been prevented. How does approximately $80 billion get stolen right under our noses? And why couldn't the government prevent such widespread fraud? I know what you're thinking. This all should and could have been prevented. The thought of that much money being stolen due to fraud so easily doesn't make any sense. Talcove, whose company maintains huge databases of public records and sells verification services to governments, says the government and the lenders and banks could and should have prevented such widespread fraud. When COVID relief was proposed, he said he spoke to Larry Kudlow, then a top economic advisor to President Donald Trump, and I explained to him that this was going to be the biggest fraud in the history of our country. And then I was told that you can have speed or you can have security, and that they'd rather just get the money out. Talcove said he told Kudlow that banks have the ability to rapidly identify their customers. Kudlow didn't respond to requests for comment. The idea that there is a trade-off between speed and security is a false premise, Talcove said. It's not true. If you believe that, then some of our biggest companies in this country that face consumers would be bankrupt, right? It is very easy to stop the type of fraud that we're looking at. In fact, the private sector stopped this a decade ago. So what is the Justice Department going to do about this? How are they going to capture and find more fraud cases?
We're talking fraud in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. Can you handle those many cases?
We can and we will, Lester.
How do you know when you're successful, given the fact that you or no one else can give us a real number of how much money was taken, how many perpetrators there were?
We are successful every time we are holding accountable somebody who's trying to profit on the pain of Americans.
The Pandemic Response Accountability Committee is employing data scientists who use artificial intelligence to plow through 150 million records searching for fraud patterns. In one case, it found that a phone number for a gas station in Houston was used on 150 loan applications. It sends such leads to federal agents who follow up on foot. This tactic will aid into finally capturing hopefully all fraudsters. Unfortunately, not all of them will be captured. To those of you out there who haven't been caught yet, consider yourself very lucky, or maybe your time will eventually come.